Okay, a quiet one for the end of the year, but I'll get started with the recording. Welcome to the final game show of the year. It's episode 10, so I figure it's just as good a way to end off the year as any. Last episode of 2020. And unfortunately, I couldn't do this last week because I had some technical issues. But I've since resolved that. It was just basically a tick box in streaming software that was preventing things from working. Anyway, this week, hello, Dave. This week, I'm doing a video on not a classic game, but a video on a program that is essentially, it's essential for classic gaming, basically for every game that was released prior to about 1996. Hey, Corey. So I'm going to be covering DOSBox today. And what is DOSBox? Well, it's a DOS emulator. So we'll just Corey, your jokes are bad even when you're not tipsy, so I'll let that one slide. So I'll just quickly show you DOSBox in action, and then I'll go back and explain what it is and what it does. So that there is DOSBox. How good is that soundtrack? Anyway, that'll do for now. So what is DOSBox? Well, it is an emulator of the disk operating system. So in the early days of PC gaming, a game which is higher level software required low level software, such as an operating system, to access the hardware on a computer. And prior to Windows, the disk operating system, or DOS, most commonly MS-DOS, which is Microsoft DOS, was the way that those programs were given access to the hardware that they were required to do things like render the graphics and play sound effects. So DOS, like all operating systems, is a low-level program. And by low level, it means that it has, I guess, direct access to the hardware, so it can send commands directly to your hardware, rather than a high-level program, which is, I guess, more abstract. It's separated away from the hardware a little bit. So in the old days, Microsoft Windows was installed on DOS, and then you would start up your computer, you would start Windows, and then you would work within Windows. Nowadays, when you turn on your computer, it just goes straight to Windows. So the reason for DOSBox was in 2001, with Windows 95 and 98, Microsoft introduced something called DirectX, which allowed programs within Windows to have direct access to hardware, essentially removing the requirement for DOS. And in 2001, when Windows XP was released, the use of DirectX and the use of Windows was so widespread that essentially they could get rid of DOS. Now the problem was, by getting rid of DOS, every single bit of software that required DOS to run no longer worked. So you have I guess the remnants of DOS in Windows. So I'll just bring up, if you go to your search bar, and you type a CMD there, it'll bring up the command prompt. And this is essentially the remnants of DOS within Windows. This isn't an actual disk operating system. This is just a program within Windows that represents DOS, but it doesn't have the functionality of DOS. So a couple of Dutch guys decided that they saw that Microsoft was ditching DOS, and they saw that all these games are essentially going to stop working. So they started working on an emulator, which is basically a program that pretends to be something else. In simple terms, an emulator is something that tricks your computer into thinking that it is doing something else. You've got things like console emulators, which is a piece of software that tricks a file into thinking that you're playing, say, Super Nintendo. And DOS just tricks your computer into thinking it's running MS-DOS. So, where do you get it? Well, go to Google, search for DOSBox, or you can go direct to DOSBox.com. This is their website right here. So here you can find all sorts of information. Most importantly, if you click on the compatibility section there, you'll see a big list of what is supported in DOSBox, and it's relatively safe to assume that almost every DOS game runs in DOSBox. Now, the more recent the DOS game is, the more hardware that or the more power that it's going to require from your actual computer, because your computer is pretending to be another computer, so it needs a bit of processing power to do it. Thankfully, most games released, in the DOS days will easily run within DOSBox on any modern PC. So head to your downloads. You can go to, you've got a Windows self-installer there or a Mac installer. So DOSBox is open source, and it's free, and it's been ported to all different operating systems there. So Windows, it'll bring up SourceForge, and that's where you can download will start shortly. Bang, it's done. You open that installer. Yeah. Open that installer, and you'll get this installation. Click through there. You want your core files. Set up a desktop shortcut if you want. Set where you want it to install. I won't install it again because I've already got it installed. But once it's installed, it will sit in a folder. There's mine, DOSBox with the version, and there it is. And you might also have a shortcut on your desktop. If you don't, just go send to desktop, and you've got a shortcut there. Now, there's a few things that you need to do first. Now, I've got mine all configured, but what you can do is you go to Windows, you scroll down to wherever it was added. So here we go, DOSBox 07 is the version. You've got a few things here. So the first up is the options. This will open up in Notepad. Now, I've been using Notepad++ for a long time, so I prefer to use Notepad++. So if you want to know where this file actually lives on your computer, go to your computer, your C drive, users, your main user profile that you're on, then to app data, which is hidden, so you might go to view and turn on hidden items there. Go to app data, local for local apps, search for DOSBox, and in there is where the configuration files are. So you can open them in Notepad. You can just go open with, or if you've got Notepad++ installed, you can go edit with Notepad++, and there it is. So the few things you want to do in Notepad++ is we want to set up some options to make your life easier. So first thing, when you open DOSBox, it'll default to this drive called Z drive, which doesn't actually exist. So what you want to do is at the very bottom of this file, under this heading, autoexec, if it's not there, autoexec in square brackets, add it in. At the very bottom, add these lines here. Mount C to wherever you have your DOS games installed. So for me, I've got them on my D drive. So on my D drive under DOS, and then I've got, this is my essentially where I'm emulating my DOS computer. So mount C to D DOS, and then don't worry about this one, we'll cover that one later. But I've also got another drive where all my GOG games are installed. And then mount E is, that line there is essentially it's mounting a virtual E drive as a CD-ROM drive. And then this line here is essentially saying, after you've run these 3 commands, I want you to enter this text, which is open C drive. So what happens is when I start DOSBox, boom. As you can see there, it's opened up, it's done its sort of auto setup thing here, and then the first thing it's done is gone mount C DDoS, mount D as my GOG folder, and then mount E as this. E doesn't exist because I don't currently have a disk mounted. And then it does this C text, and I'm on C drive. As you can see, I'm running in a window here. So there's another few options you can configure in DOSBox. So back in this config file, going all the way to the top. As you can see, these bits with the hashes at the front, they're essentially comments. So anything after a hash is a comment, and the program will ignore whatever's written after a hash. And this is where you've got an explanation of what each of these fields here does. So full screen is, I've got it set to false, so when I open the program, it opens in a window. You can set that to true if you want it to open in full screen. However, I prefer to open it in a window, and if I want it to go full screen, you just go Alt-Enter, and it goes full screen, but that probably messed with the stream there. Anyway, another thing you can do is, another one that's relevant is full resolution. So when it goes to full screen, what resolution do you want it to be? I set that to desktop. So that way it keeps the original, I guess, scaling of the program, but it stretches it to the size of your screen. This bit here, window resolution, is where you can put basically how big you want this window to be. So you can set that to whatever you want. I set it to a 4:3 resolution, so that's like an old square computer monitor, but you can set that to a widescreen resolution if you want. Keep in mind, most DOS games weren't widescreen, so a lot of them will stretch. This bit here, overlay, or the output, I can't really explain a lot of it, but an invaluable site is, if you go to, if you Google the DOSBox wiki, so once you get to the DOSBox wiki, you can search for dosbox.conf, and here's a link I prepared earlier, and this will take you through all the little fields in the config file. So it explains what the different outputs do. Certain outputs don't support certain things, so if you want to stretch your screen, you won't be able to do it in, say, I think Surface. Yeah, so Surface does not support scaling or aspect correction. But for the most part, you can leave that as overlay and it will work for everything. You can ignore most of the other ones if you want to get into more of the details. The DOSBox wiki is awesome. Scrolling down, there's a few other things here. This section basically tells DOSBox what type of computer it wants to emulate. So there's all these different values here. You've got a CGA, which is like the old pink and sort of teal coloring. Tandy, which is like another old PC, EGA, which is another type of graphics adapter, enhanced graphics adapter. Then you've got VGA, which is video graphics adapter, I think, and Super VGA, which is the default. And that will keep you square for almost everything. But you don't need to mess with any of this, really. The next section you want to go to is the render. So I like to keep here the aspect is true. And the reason for that is it keeps the original aspect ratio of whatever you're playing. So if you're playing something in full screen and if you've got that set to false, it will often stretch the game wider than it is meant to be. So you want that set to true, so you'll get the game in its original form. And then this scaler. So a scaler is, I guess, a way of resizing an image, and there's different ways to scale. So normal, I'll show you the examples here. If you look up scaler in DOSBox, here's the examples. So using a normal scaler, it essentially keeps the original, I guess, pixelated look of something. Normal 2x means it scales it double the size of the original. Normal 3x is it scales it to triple the size of the original. So that when you take a screenshot in DOSBox, when you look in your files at the screenshot, it will actually be 3 times larger than the original resolution. Then there's all these different types of scalers. So MAME, high quality, interpolation, SAI, TV, so you've got the scan lines there, RGB, which is like a dot matrix, and then scan lines there. So there's different ways of scaling things, and you can play with these to get interesting effects on your games to simulate, a different type of screen. But I like to keep it at normal 3x because it's sort of faithful to the original games. That's all you need to worry about in the config file, really. You can dig more into this, but it's sort of something you can mostly ignore when you're beginning to play with DOSBox. All of this sort of tends to come pre-configured, but the only things I change tend to be full screen, the window resolution, the full resolution, and I add these auto exec lines at the bottom there. That's all I do usually. So once you've opened up DOSBox, boom, what do? Well, as you remember, I've got my D drive DOS mounted as the C. So DOSBox thinks that the C drive or DOSBox thinks that DDoS is actually a C drive. So there's a couple of things you can do in DOS. If I want to change to my D drive or any other drive letter, you just go drive letter with a colon. I'm on D drive. Back to C drive. If I want to go see what folders are in this drive, I can go dir. That's short for directory. Boom. It brings them all in a list. If you've got heaps of folders and that list is too big to show on the screen, you can go dir/w for wide, and it displays them in a sort of horizontal alignment. So one of the folders is games. Let's go cd games. CD means go to that directory. CD games, let's see what's in here. Boom. CD, let's go CD Dune. I'm in the Dune folder. Let's have a look in here. As you can see, there's heaps of files. And I think so when you're starting up a game, you want to pick the .exe file. It will normally be the title of the game. So let's just try Dune 2. No, Dune. There we go, Dune. Oh, that's weird. Yeah, that's right. I'm sound's gone. I just noticed that. Where's the sound gone? Okay. Right, we're back. So as I was saying, I don't know where I was up to, but you can bring up the options for DOSBox. In the start menu, bring up the manual, and you can search in there for the hotkeys. But there's the essentials there. Control-Alt-F5 records video using DOSBox's inbuilt video encoder. Control-F5, a screenshot. Control-F6 records sound. Now, where was I? Okay, so yeah, in the manual you'll find a lot of the shortcut keys for DOSBox. Now, one of the ones you might need to use is there's this section here in the top bar there. It says cycles, and that is how many CPU cycles the program is emulating. Essentially, how fast is the virtual processor processing. Some games, like Dune 2, actually run a little bit clunky when you're using the default cycles. So, I'll show you what I mean. So it's on 3,000 cycles, as you can see at the top there. And see how everything is kind of clunky a bit.
Warning, Ordos unit approaching.
What you want to do there is, I'll just leave this so that music isn't blasting over the top of me. But what you want to do is you press Control F12, and you can see in that top bar there, as I press Control F12, the cycles goes up in however many increments. And you can basically play with that. Control F11 brings them down, and you can play with that until your game runs smoothly. As you can see, this DOSBox status window, which opens up when you start DOSBox, this essentially provides you with a bunch of system messages. And the cycle feature of DOSBox maxes out at 20,000 cycles. You can use the configuration file to add more, but you won't need to. So that's all covered. Now, the big thing is, where do you get games? That's what everyone wants to know. Well, I have a few favorites. So first of all, I don't know if you've read it, but I recently wrote an article on my Medium page, and this was all about the abandonware scene. Abandonware, DOSBox, GOG, and the unsung heroes of the games industry. And in this article, I basically talk about the history of abandonware and a lot of the sites where you can get it. What is abandonware? Well, abandonware is essentially a game that is no longer available for distribution. You can't buy it anywhere. Whoever owns the copyright is refusing to distribute it, or is just not distributing it. And so these programs essentially abandoned. Now, technically, it is, I guess, technically illegal to download abandonware games. However, most IP owners will ignore it because they're not making any money off it. It's not hurting them, and it's keeping, I guess, the memory of the game alive. So one of my old favorites is Abandonia. Another one is Home of the Underdogs. This was essentially one of the originals, and this site specializes in games that were kind of forgotten classics. And then one of the newer websites, started in 2008, I think, was My Abandonware. And this is probably the one I use most of all these days. But the cool thing about these websites, the one thing I really respect, is they all follow this thing called the Abandonware Code, which is, we will provide the games for free until someone like GOG starts reselling them. As soon as they become available for sale, we remove them. So, for example, Doom is, the original Doom is available on GOG, and the GOG version of Doom runs in DOSBox. So if you go to My Abandonware and search for Doom, you'll just get a link to the DOSBox page. So it's got a little money icon there. I try and go get Doom, buy the game on GOG or Steam. So I like how they do that. It sort of, I guess, solidifies their reputation as, they're only doing it for games that, will die without the support. So it's pretty admirable. The Abandonware ring, which is, I guess, a ring of sites. The Abandonware ring has little frequently asked questions here, and it is essentially outlines their policy. So what is abandonware? What is abandonware? Well, it has to be older than, I think they say, 5 years and no longer sold or supported by a company. So let's find a game. What's it going to be? So go to the search, we'll go to the platform, and let's choose MS or DOS here. Corey, what prompts GOG to make them available? GOG, they started out in 2008, I think it was, and their mission was essentially to re-release classic games that were no longer available. So they negotiate with the current copyright holders to basically get a distribution deal or distribution rights. One of their biggest successes in recent years was they got access to re-release Warcraft 1 and 2 and Diablo. And Blizzard is a company that has never outsourced their distribution. So the fact that GOG scored that deal really shows you how much respect there is in the games industry for what GOG is doing in keeping the classics alive. So here we go. Oh, look at that. Lemmings Winter Wonderland. So download here. Often down here on My Abandonware, they'll have a little section that'll tell you how to install it and how to get it running. But for DOS games, we don't need to worry about it. So I'm going to go to DOS. Save it there, extract it in a folder. So I'll show an example of my DOS folder. So games. Here we go. Winter. This is another game. So once you download the zip file from My Abandonware, extract it in here, and then you'll have these files here. Boom. Go to DOSBox. Let's go CD Games, CD Winter, and Winter. And we've got the Winter Olympics. Oh, and that broke. Most games will work, some of them are a bit funky. And that's as simple as it gets, really. Download the installer files, extract them, and hopefully they'll work. What's another one? Here we go. CD Haunted. Haunted. Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion. And there you go. It's as simple as that. So another thing you can do is I like to use this sort of this DOS window here, type in all the commands because it has I have the nostalgic attachment to it. However, you can get things called DOSBox front ends. And I'll show you an example of a DOSBox front end. So, where is it? Utilities, DOSBox. So I've made a little folder in here called front ends, and if you just Google DOSBox front ends, you'll get a whole bunch of options that you can download. But the one I like best is DBGL. And basically what it is you extract it to there, you open it up, and it's a program it's like a Windows program that essentially does all that background DOSBox stuff for you. If you want to add a game, you go to the Add Game Wizard. All you have to do is search for it. So, for example, Doom. And it will search it'll search Moby Games by default, but you can switch that to something else. You can switch it to Metropolis, a few other sites, but Moby Games is the biggest sort of database of classic games. And then you can create a little file here, and it'll add a entry. So I've got Alleycat here. I can edit the profile if I want. So there's all the information that is downloaded from Moby Games. I can go through, I can customize some of the details, what scaler to use, what resolution I want, and so on, whether I want it in full screen or not, and so on. And then when you want to play it, you just go Run Profile, boom. So DOSBox front ends can take some of the pain out of running a DOS game. And to wrap things up, I'll show you some of the things that you can do in DOSBox. One interesting thing, and you might have seen the hint on my desktop background there. So what is DOSBox? It's an emulator of a disk operating system. So most people use it to install games, but you can also use it to install Windows. So I've installed Windows 3.1 within DOSBox. And there we are. This is what Windows was like in about 1993. So what have we got? Let's go to Games, the original Solitaire. Corey, I do use PlayStation 1 and N64 emulators sometimes. My favorite one for N64 is Project 64. It's probably the easiest and most compatible. And for PlayStation 1, I haven't used them a lot, and they're a bit janky. But I might do a session next year on using console emulators. So there we are, that's Windows 3.1. Exit Windows, this will end your Windows session, and I'm back in DOS. One other thing you can do is, if you've got GOG installed, and you've got the GOG Galaxy clients, I'll just open up GOG Galaxy. You don't have to use the client or the launcher for GOG. You can install them separately using installer files if you like. That's a great thing about GOG, is almost everything is optional and everything is DRM free. All right, so I'm going to go to my installed games. Let's find a classic DOS game. How about Dark Forces? So this little option up here, drop down, manage installation, and show folder. So remember when I was saying when I load up DOSBox, one of the sections I've got here is my games folder for GOG. If I go to D, there's my GOG games. Not all of them are DOS games, but many of them are. Now, when a GOG Galaxy DOS game installs, it essentially installs, you've got the folder there for Dark Forces. I open that up. And what you've got in here is you've got the game mixed in with all these DOSBox files. So every single DOS game that you buy off GOG, it installs a local copy of DOSBox in here. Which means that every single game you buy off GOG, you can have a separate config file for. So generally it will be something like DOSBox_df for darkforces.conf. So you can go right click on that, edit, or you can open it in Notepad, and you've got a config file that is independent of your main DOSBox install. So I can set different options here for different games. So I could have one set of options for Dark Forces. I could go back and I could say have an entirely different set of options for Ultima 4, for example, which is DOSBox_Ultima 4. Dark Forces config, Ultima 4 config. So what might happen is when you buy a game from GOG and install it, that's a DOS game, you might find that when you play it, it will default to full screen. It might be a bit janky resolution. So what you'll want to do is go to the install folder, find that game's config file, open it and edit it and design it and reconfigure it as you wish. Desktop, full screen files, window resolution, whatever. And then you can just launch it with GOG's link there. Boom. And it launches its own little DOSBox version. Now, a lot of the time, GOG will have GOG. A lot of the time, GOG will have pre-configured the say the CPU cycles and such for you, but sometimes you might need to adjust things. But usually, it's about right.
Kyle delivers.
Here's another game that we're going to have to do a stream of in the new year. Underrated, this one. And there we go. So that is how to, if you buy DOS games from GOG, that's how you can just use this drop-down option, manage installation, go to the folder, and you can configure games individually, essentially with their own conf file. So that is the essentials of DOSBox. If you want to get into more detail on using DOSBox, for example, you've got a say a disk image of a DOS game that's on CD, and you want to mount it. You can go to this article on image mount, and it tells you how you can mount a CD image as a virtual drive. But yeah, the DOSBox wiki is basically your go-to spot for everything related to DOSBox. And then there's also a DOSBox Reddit, I'm pretty sure. Yep, a DOSBox Reddit. And then you've got DOSBox.com. Their forum is a good source of information. So if you've got any questions, I'm always happy to talk about DOS games and configuring DOSBox, so hit me up, or go to the forums, or head to Reddit. And, oh, look at that, 4,500 karma. Nice. So yeah, you can find basically anything you want between Reddit and the forum. And that is the show for this week. So a bit longer. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you have good holidays. And like I said, if you have any questions at all about configuring and running DOSBox, please do hit me up. I'm happy to talk classic games anytime. Enjoy your holidays, and I'll see you in the new year. And we'll see, the Karma Flex. Most of that was actually from one post about Elite Dangerous, but anyway. So hit me up over the break if you like, if you want to have any suggestions for a classic game in the new year. And that is all. Thanks for watching. And I'll also, this video should be able to be replayed if you want to go back over any of the points that are covered in it. Until next time, see you later. And the recording is off.